those lines, I mean, there's been a debate over the last few years, sort of, I would characterize it briefly as inputs versus outputs. And what is the role of the legislature in terms of inputs versus outputs? A bill that Chairman Branch has advanced over the last couple of sessions is clearly output oriented. And that would be that, say that 10% of the funds that the state gives to the four-year and community colleges would be based on some formula that would include completion rates. Would you give us your thoughts on that issue?
I think that given the investment that the state of Texas and its citizens make in higher education, we have a right to expect some sort of output. The university doesn't exist in a vacuum. It has a role to play in this state or any other state. We depend upon that educated and trained workforce for the future of the state. How do we measure that the university is providing those outcomes along with all of the other things that they provide? Socialization, endless amounts of beer, a well-rounded education. And the way to do that is outcomes-based. And certainly graduation rates have a lot to do with it. But it's also not just four-year graduation rates, it's six-year graduation rates. Sure. Because when you look at an urban school where all those young people are working up to 30 hours a week, we want them to go to college, but they're not going to finish in 4 years, they're not going to finish in 6. We have
a lot of kids at the University of Texas who are not working like to take the rectory lab also, don't they? I don't know if you...
Are you talking about the one I have over there now?
Yes, I wasn't picking on him in particular.
But let's point out what the role of the community college is there. He graduated with dual credit with 23 credits at the University of Texas, and so he's not getting, and we're not going to pay for a fifth year.
Right.
And so there's a cooperative thing going on in public education and higher education that I think is very exciting. But it's going to be graduation rates, retention rates, first to second year, third to fourth year. We have, I think we're looking at things in technical and community colleges, that the jobs held by graduates within 6 to 8 months in relation to minimum wage. Clearly an output,
sure,
because of that workforce. There's a lot of moving parts. We've got to be very, very careful about one size fits all. Because where University of Dallas is probably graduating almost everybody who enrolls, Prairie View A&M doesn't have nearly as good a record, but is making a lot of progress.
Right.
At Texas Southern, we look at those 6-year graduation rates, and they're coming down really fairly dramatically. We need to make sure that that sort of accomplishment is in there, because what's at the bottom of this whole thing is part of the funding.
Well, it takes into account the different student bodies that they're working with,
exactly,
which is very important. And our view has always been supportive of that. It's not about the graph going like this. It's about the graph going like this over time. That we show some improvements in productivity, because, as you well know, additional money is not going to be there anytime near future.
We're not going to see lots of additional money in the areas. We're going to have a working surplus in the state of Texas, which is a great thing. But if you look at increased enrollments in public schools of about 78,000, you look at increased enrollments in higher education, you look for the fact that in the last 7 years that Medicaid has gone from 23% of our budget to a full 30% and may pass public education in the next 2 to 3 years.
Right.
The competition for those additional monies is going to be extreme. We may have about $8 billion left over at the end, but our constitutional spending cap will only let us spend about $4.5 billion. And so right now today, we're busy cutting $3.7 billion off of our working papers as we moved all of those things over. Yes, we want to fund this. Yes, we want to fund this. What we find out is that we're actually working at cutting spending right now.
Right. I mean, there's always a lot of competition. One of the issues in higher education is that of remedial education, or what we now call developmental education. And far too many kids obviously want to show up at a community college to work. It's about half the kids who do, which is a mixed group. Obviously, some of them are older; they just haven't recently graduated. But and I think that Commissioner Brett has said that remedial education, the way it's working now, is not really working for the betterment of the students. It's an impediment for many kids to go on. They have to take the courses, they don't get credit, they have to pay for them. But even beyond that, I think he said pretty much publicly that even those who successfully complete the remedial courses don't show that much improvement in terms of their completion rates or their abilities beyond those courses. Do you have thoughts on improvements we could be making or changes in remedial?
In terms of educational program, I don't think that's my role, certainly not my background. I think we're doing a better job. I think dual credit is getting young people ready more. I'm concerned with alignment because I'm concerned very often in high schools that counselors and others don't know precisely what is expected in math and English. If that young person wants to go to the University of Texas Tyler, they know exactly what that young person needs to be able to do when the college doors open. Community colleges, that's what community colleges do. They work with populations in transition, both young people and adults, things like that. And that's a good role for them to play. But this is really a public school question. And it has to do with alignment, and I think a lot more work needs to be done.
Sure. Now, let's get to something really critically important, and we'll go to questions from the audience. As a proud graduate of Dartmouth, as I mentioned earlier, and perhaps you could expand upon how you felt the need to go 3,000 miles away from Texas to get an education. But as a neutral observer, shall we say, of the A&M and UT Austin, I know a bill has been filed in the House to require that they greet each other on the football field at least once a year. Do you have any thoughts on that particular issue as to the outcome of that legislation?
I look at it with some disdain because since the University of Texas in football has been dodging Dartmouth now for the last 45 years. Once again, Bill, here's what happens with small town mayors. We distill things down to sort of fundamentals. It is not the role of the legislature. Who they play and how they play them and where they play them. There was a suggested bill that the legislature weigh in on conference alignment. Whether or not Tech and A&M were going to play in Cowboy Stadium or continue to play home and home. On and on and on. Whether the cable providers were going to be forced to provide the NFL network on the basic program, thus allowing them to charge everyone here a few more dollars a month, a few more millions of dollars a year. I'm big in the role of government, and that's not the role.
So you don't have any comment on the fact that Johnny McZeel is taking online courses now, is that correct? And that actually showing up at the end?
I have. That's A&M's problem. But you can bet he's going to pass it. Yeah.
We have some time. Questions from the audience, if you'd like. Anyone? Mr. Austin, you care to ask the senator a question?
Yes, sir, Senator. As you look at what you're talking about with the infrastructure, using the infrastructure fund, well, build up infrastructure assets, revolving fund, using the rainy day fund. Transportation is also very important to all of us. How are you going to balance who gets what, and is there enough? Because you look at from the water aspect and transportation, really that money will be gone just like that.
There is not enough, nor will there ever be enough money to fund all those things that we think are going to be necessary. From a subjective point when it comes to public schools or transportation, we can never supply enough money for those folks to say, hey, that's enough. Turn off the spigot. We have to work our way in between those lines. Everybody has the exact same need for transportation, whether you're in Tyler, Tomball, or Houston. Too many of those decisions, I think, are politically made because those folks at TxDOT are good counters, and they realize you look at all of the votes in this body, these bodies that are in Harris County, take Harris County, Dallas County, Bexar County, and Travis County. And so that's what probably a bigger problem. What we're going to do is I think we're going to put more money into Fund 6, which supplies transportation. The governor has said that he approves of, and I think most people do, to take money out of the Economic Stabilization Fund and put that into not only water infrastructure, but highways. I think we also ought to do it for university capital funding. And here's why. They are projects that we know have to be done. Some of them not. It takes 34 years to build a reservoir. We need to start now on a lot of them, including what's going to augment the Highland Lakes and the Edwards Aquifer right here. Projects that we know have to be built. Have to be. Projects that they're not programs, we're going to build them and be done with them. And two, projects that can be built from cash in hand, because we are going to have some of the Economic Stabilization Fund that if we don't touch, it's going to be $12 billion in just 2 to 3 years, and we can do it without debt. If you look at the money that we save on that debt going forward, it's well worth the expenditure of the money in cash from the Economic Stabilization Fund, as long as we do leave a viable reserve. Other than that, I have no opinions.
Do you have any idea what level of funding what you might suggest for higher education construction in terms of the rainy day fund?
Last time we did tuition revenue bonds, it was about $1.8 billion, which would be a couple $100 million, I think, in debt service. I would like to be able to think that we could do that this time. The request that we have from institutions of higher learning is about $3.9 billion. What we are told is without all of those projects, higher education in Texas will fail to function, and so we have to work our way through that.
Have the 4 years made, this is really sort of the first I've heard of this idea to use part of the rainy day fund. I haven't paid enough attention to higher ed, but I mean, are the 4 years seeking the money from the rainy day fund, or do they just want the TRBs?
They don't care. They're supportive of it either way. TRBs are great because the tuition revenue bonds are the worst named things ever. Because no tuition revenue ever goes into paying either debt service or retirement of debt. They should be BOHs, BFAs, buildings from heaven, because they drop on these campuses at no cost whatsoever, except operational costs to the campuses. Greatest deal ever. We're looking at a couple of things that are going to do what our former chairman Steve Ogden felt was very, very important. And some institutions or systems are going to have to put some skin in the game.
Right, but I mean, just to clarify, under what they refer to as tuition revenue bonds, really the state is picking up the tab for the cost of the construction into debt service.
The entire half.
Yeah, okay. I think that's a misnomer that many people have. Are there other questions from the audience? Anyone? Charlie?
Senator.
Yes, sir.
My dear friend Bill Hammond and I sometimes play good cop, bad cop. I love and respect Bill Hammond for what he's doing, but there is some good news in the education area. I have for many years run a laboratory in Kilgore, competing on a nationwide basis. 80% of my employees have a college degree, and I guess about 80% of that 80 got that degree in the universities and colleges over there in East Texas. And I think that our little business is living proof that East Texas rednecks make the best chemists in the world.
I would just respond in this way, Charlie. Absolutely. The 4 years and the 2 years are doing a great job, but in order for us to remain competitive, we've got to do a better job faster.
Yeah. Which one of y'all is the good cop, by the way? What you say is absolutely true. And for those of you who go around, when people say our public schools are failing and things like that, that's patently false. The public schools in a lot of areas are doing a really good job, but look at the demographic we educate in Texas and how it's changed since you and I were in school. The number of kids who are in free and reduced price lunches in school districts that are 80% free and reduced price lunches. The number of kids the number of districts that have limited English proficiency. And they're going to have to get up to speed in English, and they're going to have to pass tests and things like that. The job that's being done is enormous, and there's 5 million of them. Keep in mind that not long before a lot of us here were in school, the only jobs for women were as secretaries, nurses, and teachers. Well, nowadays, half the admissions to law school and medical school are women. Best math teachers around. And so our demographic not only is changing in Texas, but in public education. And yet, those teachers are going to start at about $40,000. They're never going to make more than $60,000 as a general rule. And we've kind of got the system that we deserve in a way, so we're trying to do things to sort of empirically improve performance and things like that, but we can't keep doing things the way that we've always done them and expect a different result. And yet, we're still doing an awful good job in a lot of areas. I've told people this for a long time. On NASA, up until the last few years ago, NASA's done some incredible things, obviously. But nobody at NASA ever took a tax test. It's really essential to nothing unless it is a useful tool to give us a report card on how we're doing and then use that tool to improve. And I think you made the point. The point is constant aspiration and improvement.